Yeah, we'll get started in a minute. Just wait for minus. Code here. Not sure when it's a quiz. I mean, just let me just start open. Okay, good morning, and let's get started. Are there any questions? Yeah, there were some emails about the lab assignment evaluations. I'll respond to them in the next few days because I need to get back to the TAs. Okay, nothing to worry. Okay, we'll sort out all the issues the some students have raised. Okay, yeah, and you would have seen that each of the assignments is evaluated for a different number of marks, but finally we'll scale them to appropriate weightage that we'll give for each of the assignments. Okay, we'll decide that later. Okay, so are there any questions about what we were discussing in the last class? So basically we are looking at how to translate the high level language statements into sequence of instructions depending on the type of the processor architecture that we are looking at. As we've been discussing, there are two major classes of instruction set architectures called the CISC architecture and the RISC architecture. Typically, CISC architecture will allow multiple memory operands in an instruction, and in any instruction, like arithmetic and logic instructions or the load and store instructions, right? Whereas the RISC architecture is what is specifically called as the load store architecture. What it implies is that only the load and store instructions can refer to the memory operands, and all other instructions can refer to only the register operands. Of course, there is a small exception wherever we have to move the address of the variables, then it may refer to a memory operand. Okay, but other than that, no arithmetic and logic instructions can refer to the memory operands in the load store architecture. As we have seen, it may result in a larger number of instructions to translate a given high-level language statement, but it will be more efficient to execute that sequence of instructions when we start looking at the methods to exploit the parallelism in the instructions, like in the pipeline process and the superscalar process. And as I mentioned, those topics will be discussed in the next course. Okay, right now I have to take my word that this RISC architecture typically leads to better methods for exploiting the parallelism in the instruction that are present for a given high-level language statement. Okay, before we go ahead with the next subtopic in this, I just want you to do this exercise. For the loop structure, earlier we have seen how to translate that into a sequence of instructions in the CISC architecture. I just want you to take a couple of minutes to translate this same statement into the sequence of instructions corresponding to the RISC architecture. Okay, yeah, please take a couple of minutes. Then I will give the solution, then you can cross check. 1 minute, there is some question in the chat box. Okay, I'll get started. Then, I mean, I suggest that you please do it on your own. Then I can check with whatever I am giving you here. So basically, I have to initialize the index variable here. So we will use the move immediate instruction, where we specify register operand some constant. Here, the constant is 0. Actually, all of this is similar to the CISC architecture. So then we have to move the addresses of the different arrays that we are dealing with. So first we'll move the address of the array P into the register R1, then move the address of Q into register R2, then address of the array R into the register 3, right? So until this point, it is exactly same as what you have done in the CISC architecture. You can go back and check the notes that we have. Now, the next thing that we need to do is compare the current index value with the final value it has to take. And for that, I need to have the value of n in a register, because the compare instruction, I cannot have the memory operand. So we'll load the value of n into the register R4. So now we do the compare operation of the index value that's available in the R0 with the final value it can take, R4. If R0 is same as R4, that is, if the index value is equal to n, then we have to come out of the loop. So for that, we'll have the label called the for end of the for loop, right? Then within the body of the for loop, we have to get the ith element of the array P, then the ith element of the array Q. So we'll perform a load operation. First, we'll get the ith element of the array P. So again, we can use the addressing mode like what we have seen in the CISC architecture, where we'll have the base address of the array P available in the register R1, and the index is available in the register R0. So the load instruction allows you to specify the addressing mode here, which is the base index addressing mode, which refers to the element of an array that you want to access, right? So effectively what we've done is we'll add the contents of this register R1 and R0 that will give the address of the ith element in the array P, and from that memory location we'll transfer the value of that element into the register 5. We do a similar operation for the ith element of array Q, right? Then we can add this ith element of array P and ith element of array Q, and then put the result, let's say, in another register R7, right? Now I need to put in this value into the ith element of the array R, right? So we'll use the store instruction, right? And here again we have a memory write operation, and the address where the memory operation has to be done is given by the base address and the index value, right? And the value that I want to write is available in the register R7, right? So with this, we complete the translation of this statement Ri equal to Pi plus Qi. Then the next step is increment the index value. So we'll perform the increment of R0. Now we have to go back to the beginning of the for loop. So where does this for loop start? It starts with the compare operation. Right. So all the instructions within this for begin and the for end, right, will be the body of the for loop, right? So after this jump instruction, we'll have the for end, right? So whatever the next statement that we have after the for loop, for that statement, the instructions will start here at the for end. So once you understand the constraint the RISC architecture has, that only the load and store instructions can refer to the memory operands. Arithmetic and logic instructions cannot refer to the memory operands. They can refer to only the register operands, right? Then we can translate this high-level language statement into the corresponding instruction sequence. Okay, yeah. Are there any questions about this? Okay. So typically, any such iterative statement or the loop statement, one can translate it into a sequence of instructions in the this process. I leave it as an exercise for you to translate the other types of loop statements like the while do statements or do while statements, right? So take a simple do while structure or the while do structure, right? And then translate it to the sequence of instructions. Okay, yeah. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to the next subtopic in these. So what we looked at so far is translation of the arithmetic statements or the assignment statements that involve the arithmetic expressions, then the if-then else statements, and the loop structure statements, right? And similar things can be done for the statements like switch statement, which is nothing but multiple if-then else statements, right? And we can also extend this method for the translation of the other loop structures in a given higher level language. Now we'll look into how to deal with the functions and function calls, because typically in any high level language program, we don't write the whole program as a single entity. We split that into small modules, and each module is called as a function. And then we define the functions. Then we make a sequence of calls to these functions, right, according to the task that we want to perform, right? So basically, we need the support in the instruction set architecture to define the functions and also to perform these function calls. And also typically, as you are familiar with, each of these modules or the functions that we define will have the arguments, right? And as all of you are familiar with, there will be two types of arguments that we need to pass, right? Where the arguments may be passed by their value, right? Or I may want to pass an argument by reference, right? I'm assuming that all of you are familiar with this. So whenever we are talking about an argument that's passed by value, we'll be passing the value of that argument whenever we call the function. And whenever we are referring to an argument that's passed by reference, we will pass the address of that variable or address of that argument, right, when we call the function. We'll see with some simple examples, right, how to translate the functions that involve arguments that are passed by value or passed by reference, right? And then we try to understand how one can translate this function calls in the assembly language or the machine language instructions. Okay, and there are a number of methods by which one can pass these arguments for the function, right? But most of the systems, they pass these arguments through the stack. Okay, so now we'll look at what is the stack, what are the kind of operations that can be performed on the stack, right? Then we'll look at how to pass the arguments through the stack and then implement the function calls. Then, of course, implement the function itself or execute the function itself, right? Again, I'm assuming that all of you are familiar with the basic operations on the stack, right? What you're going to look at is the physical implementation of this stack, right? And then support that's required to perform the necessary operations on the stack. As all of you know, the stack is a data structure, which is what is known as the last in and first out data structure, right? And the two operations that are allowed on the stack are the push operation and the pop operation, where typically we push some value or some entity onto the stack. In the pop operation, we take something out of the pop, something out of the stack, right? And there are a number of ways of implementing this stack, right? And we'll look at one of the methods as given in the book on the elements of computer systems. The other books may talk about implementing the stack in a slightly different manner, right? But for the sake of discussion, we'll just follow the method that's given in this book, right? So in order to implement this stack, right, we have to use the part of the memory, part of the main memory. So typically, whenever a particular program is going to be executed, the operating system will identify the part of the main memory for the stack related operations, right? And typically it will be called as the stack segment associated with the particular program to be executed. So typically for any program to be executed, there will be three segments. One is the code segment where the instructions will be available. Then the data segment where all the variables data will be available. Then this stack segment will be used for all the operations where the stack is going to be involved, and we'll be quickly trying to understand, right, what are all the operations that will require the stack in performing those operations. Okay, so we'll try to understand how the stack can be implemented, and then how to perform this push and pop operations. Okay, so one method to implement this stack is identify part of the memory. Okay, and we'll identify the starting part of the memory where the stack is going to be available, right? And we'll consider the implementation of stack where the stack will grow in the increasing address, right? So we'll initialize some value for the start of the stack, right? And as we keep pushing the elements on the stack, right, the addresses that will be used or the memory locations that will be used will be associated with the increasing values of these addresses, right? Just for the sake of discussion, let's say this is at I'm just assuming that it's a 16-bit address, right? And if the stack is going to start at 100H, right, then the stack pointer will be pointing to this address, right? And whenever we perform the push or pop operations, they'll be with reference to this stack. So when we put one element into the stack, right, that element will be stored at this address that's referred to by the stack pointer. Then we will increment the stack pointer, right? So that the stack pointer will always point to what is called the top of the stack. So the stack pointer will always point to the top of the stack where the next element can be stored in the stack. Okay, so let's look at these simple operations, right? Let's say I have a push instruction in my instruction set architecture where I want to push the content of the register R0 onto the stack, right? So what is the operation that's involved here? I want to take the content of the register R0, then store it in the memory location that's pointed to by the stack pointer, which is referring to the top of the stack, right? So this can be indicated by this operation. We'll use some notation here. what does this notation mean here? I'll take the value of this register R0 and then store it to the memory location whose address is available in the stack pointer. And what is the stack pointer containing now? Stack pointer contains the address of the top of the stack. In this case, let's say it's 100H. If my R0 contains some value, let's say 3512H, I'm assuming that everything is a 16-bit memory location, right? So when I perform this push operation, what will be available in this memory location is the content of this register R0, let's say it's some 3512. Then what should the stack pointer point to now? The stack pointer should always point to the top of the stack where I can push the next element. So we have to perform another operation called incrementing the stack pointer, right? So we'll take the current value of the stack pointer, then add 1 to it, right? And then it will point to the next memory location, right? So after this push operation, my SP will move to right? My SP will move to next location, right? That is 1001H, because that's where I can push the next element, right? So this is what is the push operation, where we take the value that needs to be pushed and put it into the memory location pointed to by the stack pointer and then increment the stack pointer, right? Then what is the pop operation? Let's say I want to perform the pop operation into register R1. What does that mean? Yeah, I want to take a value that's available in the stack and then put it to the register R1, right? Let's say whatever the value that I have stored by this push operation, I want to bring it into the register R1, right? So what is the operation that we need to do here now? I first decrement the stack pointer, because the stack pointer is currently pointing to an empty location where the next value can be pushed, right? So, but I'm interested in the value that's already there in the stack, right? So in order to get that value, right, I have to decrement the stack pointer, right? And then perform this memory read operation where the address where I am going to get the data value is available in the stack pointer. From that memory location, I'll take the value and then put it into the register R1. I mean, don't get carried away that we are talking about a simple operation of moving the contents of R0 to R1 by using the push and pop. That's not really the purpose, right? I'm just only explaining how to implement the push and pop operations on the stack. We'll be later saying how we are going to make use of this push and pop operations in implementing the functions and passing the arguments for the functions and so on. Okay, yeah. So basically, we see that the push operation involves pushing the value into the current top of the stack and then increment the stack pointer, and pop will be decrementing the current stack pointer and then transferring the data from that memory location into the register R1. And once we take out that data from the stack, right, that location is available for pushing another new value, right? That is the reason why the stack pointer is brought down by 1. Okay, yeah. Any questions about this? Okay. Yeah. Now we are interested in implementing the function calls and then defining the functions. Before we go into that, let's try to understand what is it involved in performing the instruction fetch. Right? Where we interested in this instruction fetch? I have typically a sequence of instructions, I1, I2, so on, whatever those instructions are. Let us say ij, then ij plus 1, and so on. Right? So basically, in the execution of the program, which is represented by the sequence of these instructions, right, we have to fetch each of the instructions and then execute that instruction. Right? So whenever I'm going to start the execution of the program, the PC should point to the first instruction's address, that is where the instructions are stored in the memory, right? Then after fetch this instruction 1, my PC should point to the next instruction, right? So if I'm going to fetch instruction ij, right, what is the operation that is involved here? The instruction is available in memory, right? And the address where that instruction is available in the memory is available in the program counter, right? So we take the address that's available in the program counter and then perform the memory read operation. And whatever we read from there is the instruction corresponding to this ij now, that we put in a register in the control unit, right? That register we call it as the, let's say, the instruction register. And this instruction register contents will go as input to the control unit, which will perform what is called the decoding of the instruction and then generating the necessary control signals. We'll come back to that later. Okay. Now, after I get this instruction from the memory and then put it in the instruction register, right? What should my PC contain? The PC should contain the address of the next instruction. So I have to perform the increment operation. So typically fetching of the instruction involves these two sub operations. One is the memory transfer, that is reading the contents of the memory location pointed to by the PC and then getting the instruction and putting it in the instruction register, then incrementing this program counter by 1 so that it will point to the next instruction, that is ij plus 1 here. So at any point of time, whenever you are fetching an instruction, these two sub operations will be carried out. Now what I'm going to ask you is, whenever I'm calling a function, let's say I have defined a function which is named as function func1, func1, right? Then I want to execute this function. So basically, I want to make a call to this function. What is it involved in making a call to this function? Basically, my execution of the instructions will have to move to the location where the function 1 is stored or function 1 is available, all right? So I have to put the address of so function 1 will be available somewhere in the memory, and the starting address of the sequence of instructions correspond to this function 1. I need to bring it into the program counter, right? So that the next instruction that will be fetched will be the first instruction in this function call, right? So then we'll go ahead and start the execution of the instructions in this sequence of instructions correspond to this function 1. Then after I execute that function, what should happen? Let's say this is at some ij where I have this call instruction. After I complete the execution of this function 1, what is the next instruction that needs to be executed in the main program? Let's say this is the main program, where in the main program, the instruction ij is a call instruction, right, where I'm calling a function. And after I complete the execution of the sequence of instructions correspond to this function 1, I need to come back and then execute the next instruction that is there at ij plus 1, right? So typically, as you are familiar with in the higher level language, at the end of the function, there will be what is called a return, because we are indicating that we have completed the execution of the body of the function, and then we have to return back to the point wherever that function is called, right? So at the end of this execution of the sequence of instructions in the function, we have to perform a return operation, right? So typically, there will be a return instruction at the end of the instruction sequence of any given function, and this return instruction should guarantee that the address of this ij plus 1 will be brought into the PC so that we go ahead with the execution of the instruction after the call instruction, right? So typically, the two instructions are going to be there, a call instruction where the function is going to be called, and at the end of the instruction sequence for the function, right, there will be a return instruction which will perform this operation of putting the return address into the program counter, so that wherever the function is called, right, after the function is executed, the next instruction after this call instruction will be available in the PC, right, and will resume the instructions, execution of the instructions in the main program after this finishing the function call. Okay, so basically we'll be looking at how we are going to make use of the stack, right, to take care of this operation, because somewhere I need to store the address of this ij plus 1, right, as you'll be seeing quickly, right. This information will be made available in the stack, right, and then at the end of the execution of the instructions to given function, we'll take it out of the stack and then put it in the program counter, right. So typically whenever you make a call to the function, the call to the function involves two operations. We have to push the program counter, right, because when you completed the instruction fetch for this ij, which is a call function 1, right, the PC is already pointing to PC plus 1, that will be pointing to ij plus 1, right. So we'll push this program counter, right, and then we'll load the starting address of right. So this is what involves in the execution of this call instruction, right. We fetch this instruction. After we fetch this call instruction, the PC will be pointing to the ij plus 1, right. So we will push that current contents of the program counter onto the stack, and then we'll store the starting address of this function 1 to the program counter, so that the next instruction that we fetched is going to be the first instruction in the sequence of instructions correspond to this function that's being called, that is func1. Okay, so now we can see that I'm required to use the stack to store the return addresses of each of the function calls in the program. Okay, yeah. Any questions about that? Okay. So now we'll take a very simple function and then see what is it involved in translating that function into the higher level language, into the machine language instructions, and then how do we pass the arguments to the function. Okay, and first I'll take a simple function that involves passing the arguments by reference, right. Then we'll take another example where we'll pass one argument by value and one argument by reference. I'm sure all of you are familiar with a swap function, right, where I want to swap the values of the two given variables. That is, if I have the variables a and b, right, then when I perform the swap, I'm just giving the generic description of this function, right. So whenever I want to perform this swap operation on the a and b, if before the function call, if a equal to, let's say, 100 and b equal to 200, right, after this function is executed, I want a to have the value 200 and the b value to be 100, right. So this is the simple swap operation where I just want to interchange the values of the two variables that are being passed on to the function. Okay, so how do I define this swap function? There are a number of ways to do that, but let's look at one way of doing that. Let's say I'm writing the high level language program, right. So in this case, the values of both the arguments are going to be modified. So we'll pass these arguments by reference, right. So to do that in the C language is to use the pointers, right? So basically, we'll pass these arguments by function, by reference. So we'll say int star x, int star y. If star is not there, then we are passing the arguments by value, right? And then the body of the loop function, typically we'll use some temporary variable. I'm sure all of you can write this, right? So basically, I store the value of the x into some temporary variable. Then I copy the value of y into x, right? Then I take the value that's available in the temp and then put it into the second variable y, right? So this is the typical function call. I mean, this is the typical definition of the function for the swapping of the two variables, values of the two variables. So swap int star x, int star y, then we have some temporary variable, then put the value of x into the temp, then put the value of y into x, right? And then put the value that's available in the temp to y, and then complete the function call. Then in the main program, somewhere you will have call to this function. I'm not giving the complete thing, right? Just for the sake of illustration. Let's say I may have these variables a and b, initially with values some 100, 200. Then I call this function, right? So what is it we need to pass on for the arguments for this function? Because we are passing by reference, I need to pass the addresses of these variables. So we'll use ampersand a and ampersand b to specify that we are passing the addresses of the arguments, right? And once I make the function call, then it should execute that function, right? And then we are completing the main program. I mean, we can have some print statements before and after, right, to verify what we are doing is correctly done. Okay. So this is a typical higher-level language definition of a function and then calling a function, and where the arguments are passed to the function by reference. So now our task here is to translate the statements that we have in the functions and the function calls into the machine language instructions. Okay. Yeah. So what do you think is involved in performing these operations? I want you to take a minute to think about it and then tell me, how do we realize all these operations for defining the function and also for making the function call? Okay. Now let's look at first, how do we call this function and then pass the arguments to this. So before we call the function, we need to pass the arguments for this function. And as I said earlier, we'll use stack to pass these arguments. Now let's say my stack currently right. So SP is pointing to this. That's where the top of the stack is, right? And what did I want to do? I want to pass these two arguments by reference to the function. And for that, I need to pass the addresses of these two variables, A and B, right? So in the main program, the function call will be translated into the sequence of instructions as we are going to give now. So we'll move the address of A into some register R0. So please remember that I'm using the move address instruction. right? Then we'll push R0 here, right? So after I perform this push operation, what will be available at the top of the stack now? So here I'll be having the address of A, right? And now we'll increment the stack pointer, right? So that it will point to the next location where I can push the next element, right? So basically, before I perform this push operation, the stack pointer was below. Then I push the address of the variable A here, right? And then the stack pointer has increased by 1, right? Now we'll perform passing the address of the B by first putting into the register R1 and then pushing this, right? So when I perform the second push operation, what will be available here at the top of stack? It is the address of B. So now the stack pointer will move here. All right. I'm actually giving it in the RISC architecture, but similar things can be done in the CISC architecture as well. So now we have passed the arguments here. Now I can call the function. Right. So basically, you'll use the call instruction and then specify the name of the function that needs to be called. Right. So let's say this is some instruction 0, instruction 1, then instruction 2, instruction 3, instruction 4. At instruction 5, I'll have some instruction after the function call, right? Let's not worry about what it is. So what happens when this function call is carried out? As we have seen earlier, the function call basically involves 2 sub operations. I'll push the program counter and then put the starting address of the function to be called into the program counter. So there is a push operation that's involved, right? So when I perform the execution of this call instruction, what is going to be done? The address of this I5 will be pushed onto the stack. Right? And this is actually nothing but the return address. Right? And now my stack pointer will be pointing to the next memory location in the stack. Okay. So after this function call is completed, my stack pointer is here, right? And I have already passed on the arguments, right, which are passed by reference, right? And I also put the return address of the function that's called, right, into the stack. Okay. Now I have to make use of them when I perform the execution of the function. Okay. Now let's define the function. Right. So the function is named as swap. So there will be an instruction that will be labeled with the word called the swap. Right. I'm just leaving some gap here. We'll come back to it later. Right. So now I have to get the arguments before we perform the operations for the function swap. What is it I have to do in order to execute the function swap? I had to first get the arguments here. That's address of X and the address of Y. Right? So where is the address of the 2 arguments that are passed available here? Address of A is here and the address of B is here. What are these addresses here? As you can see here, this is available at SP minus 1. This is available at SP minus 2 and this is available at SP minus 3. Right? So now I have to load the address that's available at SP minus 3, right, into some register, let's say I decide to use the register R0. So now what will R0 contain now? R0 will contain the address of the argument that's passed. That is the address of A, right? Then I get address of B into another register. Now what is it I want to do? Once I get the addresses of A and B, right? Now I have to swap the values of these A and B. So for that, I'll use some temporary locations. Okay, we'll come back to that quickly, right? So now I have to get the values of this A and B, right? So where is the address of A available? Address of A is available in the register R0. So now I have to get the content of the memory location that's pointed to by this address. So this is what is called the register indirect addressing mode. Why is it called the register indirect addressing mode? I have an address available in the register and I'm trying to fetch the value of some variable which is available at the address where the address itself is available in the register R0. So that's why we put the brackets around the R0, because if I don't put the brackets around the R0, then I'm trying to transfer the contents of the R0 itself. That's not what we are interested in here. We are interested in getting the value of the variable whose address is available in the particular register, right? So now after this instruction, what will R2 contain? R2 will contain value of A, and similarly we get the value of B, right? Yeah. Now what does it want to do? Yeah. Now I need to transfer the value of A into the address of B and the value of B into the address of A, right? So I can perform this by performing a store operation. So the value of A is available in the register R2, and I need to put that into the memory location of variable B. Yeah, please follow this carefully. Actually, I'm not using the temporary variable, right? But I'm implementing the operation in a slightly different way here, right? So I'm putting the value of the variable B, value of the variable A into the memory location of the variable B, right? And R3, which contains the value of B, right, is being put into the memory location of the variable A. So basically, we have realized the operations that are required for the swap now, right? And after this, we need to return from the function. So I'll have the return instruction, right? So now what would have happened? I passed on the arguments for the function through the stack by reference. So the addresses are all available in the stack. So I take those addresses and put it in some registers, and using the contents of the registers, I get the values of the operands, and then I do some processing here. Then I pass the values for the arguments which are given by reference, right? And then complete the functionality of this function, right? And then I'm ready to return from the function, right? So what does this return statement will do now? Return instruction will decrement the stack pointer and then pop the content of that stack pointer into some register. Here it's going to put it to the register PC, right? That's what we have seen in the return instruction. We've seen that the address that's available on the top of the stack will be put into the PC, right? So the return instruction basically performs nothing but the popping the top of the stack contents into the program counter. All right. Yeah. Are there any questions about this? Yeah, basically, I want you to understand how the arguments are passed through the stack, then how the stack contents are accessed, right? And then how these arguments are made use of in execution of the function. Then how the values that are returned to be returned by the function are being returned here, because we are passing the arguments through the reference, right? There is no explicit value that's being returned by the function. So we make use of the addresses that are available on the stack to perform the necessary operations here and execute the function. Okay. And now I'm just going to close the discussion here with the issue that arises in implementing these function calls in this manner. We have seen that the main program here uses these registers R0, R1, right? And then when I'm calling the function, I'm again using these registers R0 to R4, right? And this should not lead to changing the contents of the registers, because when the function is returned, when we return from the function, R0, R1 should contain whatever the values that were originally there before the function call, right? So actually, we need to save all registers that are being used by the function on the stack, right? And we'll be seeing that there will be a push instruction that will be using to perform this saving the contents of the registers onto the stack. And before the return, I have to perform the pop operation so that the registers will have the original values that are there before the calling of the function. So I just want to think about that, right? Accordingly, we had to make some changes in the execution of this return instruction, right? There will be a few more push instructions here in the beginning and the pop instructions at the end for the function, right? That will ensure that the original values for the registers that are being used by the function will be replaced with the earlier values for these registers R0 and R1. Okay, so we'll look into it in the next class, but I wanted to make sure that you understand what is being done here in the implementation of the functions and the function calls, where the arguments are passed through the stack. Okay, so please go through this part, right? And if there are any questions, we'll discuss. And I also want you to write a small function for computation of factorial, and then call the function by passing the value for which you want to compute the factorial by call by value, and then the factorial that's computed has to be returned by reference, right? So write a small function to do that, the iterative version of that, and then specify what is to be done when the function is called, and then how the function itself is implemented. Okay, so take this as a small exercise. We'll briefly discuss in the next class, and then close the discussion on these function calls. Okay, yeah, are there any questions? Okay, I will upload the notes so you can have a look at that and accordingly do the small exercise that I'm giving you as a homework. Okay, yeah, if there are no questions, maybe we'll stop here.
Sir, regarding the lab assignments,
yeah,
evaluation, so we were
yeah.
not aware of the evaluation procedure before, so we lost a lot of marks after.
No, I am not sure what you mean by that. I
No,
already,
sir,
I already told you that you people should write. I mean, do the assignments by following the good programming practices that you are already familiar with.
I mean, no, sir. Like few rules were like we were not aware of them before. So like we don't know how to write, and then after evaluation we got less marks. Like in some cases it was like the order in which the outputs were printed. Then we lost marks.
Yeah, you can send me an email. Let me look into it. Yeah.
So can you look back at the guidelines again, sir? Because like
no, we cannot see. We cannot do the re-evaluation of all the assignments again because it's a considerable amount of time that's involved, right?
So Would it be possible, sir, like it was written in the evaluation guidelines, so because you had cut less marks so that you wanted us to learn and implement them ahead. So, but the thing is, we have already submitted the assignments 4 to 7. So is it possible for us to, for you to give us a chance to make these changes in that assignment? Because there are things like order of printing of output for which you've cut 2.5 marks.
Yeah, that we can do. That's not a problem.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
That's not a problem.
So also, sir, for the upcoming assignments, would you give us the way of evaluating before itself? Because a few guidelines we are not aware of. And
The
marks,
similar guidelines should be followed, because the guidelines are
if
not
there
going
are
to be
any
different.
extra guidelines, then would you make us aware of them?
See, the guidelines will be slightly different from one assignment to another assignment, because the kind of things to be done are different. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. That is the reason why there is difficulty in pre-specifying the guidelines. Because only when you start evaluating the assignments, right, then we know what is to be looked for to make sure that things are done properly. Okay. But I think the penalties are all very, very small, right? If there is any major penalty, please let me know. I'll look into it.
Okay, so you're gonna give a chance to resubmit the 4 to 7 assignments.
That we can allow you to do that. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Will you send a mail regarding that?
Yeah, I'll send a mail. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. Bye. Yeah.
There were some mistakes that were done in assignment 1 and 2, and for them the marks have been cut in assignment 3 also. So can you also look for that, like the marks for the same mistake are not?
No. Let me just complete the way the evaluations are done. Each of the assignment is evaluated by 2 TAs. I mean, not that there are 2 evaluations. Basically, the assignment 1 is evaluated by 2 TAs by sharing the workload, and assignment 2 is done by another 2 TAs, and assignment 3 is done by another 2 TAs. Okay, and it's all done in parallel. Yeah.
So the thing is, if the assignment would have been evaluated weekly, then we would have got the chance to correct our mistakes in the next assignment. But since now all 3 assignments were evaluated simultaneously, people didn't got the chance to correct their mistakes from assignment.
Anyway, we are giving the chance for the later assignments now.
Sir, I mean that if someone has committed a mistake in assignment 1 and if they use the same chip again in assignment 2 and 3, you are cutting marks for the same mistake again and again.
I understand that. See, you also have to understand the constraint that we have, right? Getting the teaching assistants in place, and then they're also not familiar with this hardware description language based assignment. It's not that all of them are BTech students from here, right? So it took some time for us to, get the TS also in a position to do the evaluation of the assignments. Okay, it's not similar to the evaluation of the assignments in the other courses where it's all mainly C program or C++ programming, which all the TS will be familiar with, right? So please understand the nature of the assignments here, and the evaluations are going to be different from the evaluation of the assignments in the other courses. Okay. So
sir, and
yeah,
things like you said in class sometimes that like we have to include 2 invalid cases, for example, for encoder.
Yes.
And some things, but then the TAs have cut marks for including extra cases. and like in priority encoder, different inputs will have the same outputs, right? In priority encoder.
See, any such cases you can point it out to me.
We lost marks for validity bit, sir. For including validity bit.
No. What I'm saying is, any such discrepancies, you just send me an email. I'll look into it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Any other points? Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.